Good afternoon. My name's Chris Sloan, and I'll be the moderator for today's panel. First thing I'd like to do is thank the rest of my team. So I had the Abbeys, the pleasure of working with the Abbeys in this session, and I was a remote distance, so I lived down in North Carolina, so it was a little interesting for me to do it, but we've all lived through COVID, so we're very good on Zoom at this point. So on to our panel today, where we're going to talk about the needs, meeting the needs of diverse families. We have our first panelist here, who is the Honorable Patty Barron. She's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Military, Community, and Family Policy. We have Cathy Marcello, who's the Director of Mill Pride Program at the Modern Military Association of America. We have Luke Schleusener, who is the CEO and founder of Out in National Security. And we have Kelly Hruska, who is from the National Military Family Association. So one of the biggest things that we face, and I'm an active duty soldier, commands like to talk about people are our number one priority. And so that's what we like to stress. And then, of course, that includes all people, including our families and our spouses. So it was great to follow the previous fire team that was here a little earlier because they talked about retention and talked about recruiting. And so retaining our force obviously saves us a lot of money, and then recruiting the force from internal helps us to, have service members who already follow the ethos, the values and things that their family members have instilled in them over time. And so today's force is more diverse than ever. We come from tons of different backgrounds, tons of different languages, and for me, being a career soldier, I have 25 years. 15 years ago, members of the LGBTQ+ community couldn't serve freely and openly. We had women that were not allowed to go to certain schools or take certain jobs in the military because it was too rough or it was too, the school wouldn't allow it because they couldn't figure out how they would go through the course. Religious accommodations were confusing, vague, and mostly not accommodating, as we called them. And then service members now are much more educated than they were before. The enlisted force is very educated, and we have access to just about all data. So things are definitely moving in the right direction. If you saw our panel outside, almost half of the force identifies as a person of color. 25% of white service members are part of a multiracial family, and then 20% of our total force are made up of women, it's a little bit different on the active and reserve, but it's about 20%. We'll open up with the first question, and it's how can the Department of Defense and the VA strengthen community relationships to ensure families of color feel safe and remain in service?
Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. I'm, again, Patty Barron, and I have to agree with all of the different data points that you just mentioned, Chris. Certainly, we're a very diverse force now, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are an equitable force. However, I would say that we are working very, very hard to get there. And from the very top on down, diversity, equity, and inclusion and access have been words that we've been saying from almost day one. Now, words are words and actions need to follow, right? And I think we recognize that. Certainly Secretary Austin is very keen on making sure that there's opportunities for all, so equity, again, is incredibly important. I would also say that this administration is also very diverse, and I myself, as a political appointee, find myself an immigrant from another country that when they announced, when we were sworn in that one day, I'm originally from El Salvador. I came to this country when I was 6 years old. And believe it or not, in my country of origin, they somehow knew that a Salvadoran was getting, sworn in to work with the Biden administration, and family members said, "Hey, your name was on our TV," which was crazy to think about. But I do see in the halls of the Pentagon so much has changed. We have an awful lot of women in higher levels of leadership. There's obviously not enough, but the numbers are climbing. And with our LGBTQ community especially, there seems to be, it's not even a question of, it's just people working and wanting to work together and making sure that we're moving in the right direction. Now, you mentioned the community piece and how can the DoD work stronger with communities. I would say that this particular group of folks at the Pentagon do reach out to the military service organizations and the veteran service organizations and others to provide information, to gain information, and believe it or not, we pay attention to the surveys that are out there that many of you do throughout the year, and we look at what that survey is telling us and how does it align with what we in the echo chamber are hearing, and we try very, very hard not to put ourselves in stovepipes, but to really be open-minded about some of the information that we're getting.
One thing I would add is that we know historically that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was kind of weaponized, especially against and disproportionately against women and people of color. And so going back to right some of those wrongs with some targeted help would probably fix some of the past wrongs. The VA has a really amazing program of, outside of the DoD discharge upgrade, there's a separate, just for VA benefit purposes, character of review discharge upgrade. And so I think a lot of people don't know about that. I certainly know a lot of vets who left under negative circumstances probably don't know about that. And they can actually get benefits by looking at extenuating circumstances. And that might help some of that disproportionate effect of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Obviously, I don't represent communities of color necessarily, but we do have constituents who are of color. It would require, as Cathy said, more focused outreach to disproportionately impacted communities. I would also say that we do not promote enough African Americans through the Officer Corps to flag rank, and combating implicit bias and perhaps shifting how we promote would make a big difference, in addition to further engaging the African American officers we do have. And there's lots to be done not only positively towards that community, but deconstructing bias within the military when it comes to, the Secretary Austin did have a stand down for extremism, but you still can't put out a pride flag, you still have a harder time talking about Black Lives Matter, and you have a sitting US Senator saying that January 6 people should be in the US military, and something has to be done about that as a way to welcome a more comprehensively diverse force, because the American military is best when it's full of all Americans and all American talents. And you can't do that with a bunch of violent extremists.
I just want to highlight some of what Patty has said. I think the Department of Defense and the services have really stepped up their outreach to non-governmental organizations and asked for their help and assistance in creating more cohesive and welcoming communities. But I also think that we're seeing more NGOs that are cropping up that are being more representative of diverse populations. I mean, we have two up here. They're Minority Veterans of America. And so I think that those are positive steps in the right direction that can help be more inclusive. I know we're especially appreciative that when we hear from families, especially when we have children that are facing bias or discrimination in communities, that we will reach out to the Department of Defense and to the various agencies, and they've been very responsive and have worked with families to ensure that they were feeling safe and heard.
I thought if I could give an example of exactly that, Kelly. While I was on vacation, my daughter is a veteran and also a military spouse living in Germany. Her across the street neighbor was Air Force, and the Air Force mom was a mom of a transgender son. And when we got to talking and she started telling me a little bit about some of the challenges they were having, the challenge they were having was with DoDEA schools. And it wasn't that DoDEA was not accepting of the child, it was that they had processes that didn't allow for the name that showed up on the virtual little square to be changed to the name that he was using. And that was hard for him. And all it took was an opportunity for that message to get to the right people at DoDEA. And even though originally they said, well, that can't be fixed, you know what, it could be fixed. You just need to find the right person to fix it. So I think part of it too is getting the message to the right person that has the ability to fix a policy or a program.
Great. So I kind of jumped the gun a little bit on the questions. I apologize for that. And I'd like to give each of the panelists a moment to introduce themselves a little bit further. And when we talk about nonprofits and what people are doing to assist service members, they'll be able to tell you a little bit more about that now. So if you want to start next.
Yeah, again, Patty Barron. I'm a 30-year Army spouse, followed my husband for 30 years, worked in the advocacy world for quite some time, started at the National Military Family Association where we all start, and then I also worked at the Association of the United States Army as their Family Readiness Director, and now here I am.
Hi, I'm Cathy Marcello. I work at Modern Military Association of America. I'm the Children and Families Program Director called Mil Pride. We advocate for LGBTQ service members, veterans, and their families. I started advocating for LGBTQ military youth when my own child transitioned 13 years ago.
Alrighty. Hi, folks. Luke Schleusener. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Out in National Security, which serves to connect communities who are queer across the national security enterprise, from the IC all the way out to international finance. We are about 4 years old. Before all of this, I worked at a tech startup and spent 5 years at the Pentagon working for 3 Secretaries of Defense, Panetta, Hagel, and Carter. Our organization advocates law, custom, and policy change. And we meet on a biannual basis with the Deputy Secretary of Defense. And before Congress, we are pushing for benefits to be returned to LGBTQ veterans and to launch pilot programs to improve the quality of care under TRICARE and at the VA.
And I'm Kelly Hruska. I'm Director of Government Relations for the National Military Family Association. NMFA is the oldest military family serving organization in the United States. We started with advocacy, but as the years went on, what we were hearing from families through our advocacy into programming.
Great. Thank you very much. So our next question is, how can the Department of Defense improve pregnancy and parenthood policies to recruit and retain more women and men? And how are we addressing the needs of mothers in uniform? And Kelly, if we can start with you on this one.
Great. So
You're the
thank
families.
you. So yes, I'm families. So the Department of Defense and the services have really been grappling with this issue of how to be responsive to families. It's a readiness issue. And as you heard earlier on the discussion about recruiting and retention, it is a recruiting and retention issue. There have been lots of changes in the parental leave policy over the past few years, but most recently, the Department of Defense, and I apologize, but I've written this down because there have been so many changes, but they have just provided a new policy that will provide 12 weeks of paid, non-chargeable parental leave to service members who have a child through birth, adoption, or long-term foster care placement of at least 24 months. This is in addition to the convalescent leave for the parent who gives birth. And so we're very excited about this policy, especially that it does include that long-term fostering, leave for long-term fostering. And we just feel that these are positive policies that are taking into the parent's health. There are some caveats. Patty can talk about it, especially with the parental leave. You have to use it within a year, and you don't need to use it consecutively. But it has to be taken in at least 1 week increments. We think that these are policies that are a little more family forward for service members, and does signal that who was the Marine Corps general that said if we wanted you to have a family, you would have been issued one. And so it really addresses that. The one thing that I think the services have struggled with, and as a Navy spouse, I'm particularly proud of the Navy because I think they've been trying to take this issue head on, is how do you make military service compatible with family life? And I think all the services struggle with it, but when my spouse had command, he was particularly troubled. He was losing female division officers because they felt at a certain point Navy life and family life were incompatible. And no matter what he could do within Navy policy, he just was not able to retain them. And he felt that that was a terrible loss of talent. And I believe it was Admiral Roughhead who actually partnered with Georgetown University's to look at some family policies that could create some on-ramps and off-ramps for sailors so that they could see a more viable path ahead for military family life and for military service, whether they were male or female, or queer or non-binary. So, I think that those are policies. The services are still struggling. Are we there? No. But, to be quite honest with you, I think at some point we really need to take a step back and appreciate that we've come an awful long way. And, we still have a ways to go, but it's good to see the progress.
She's right. I mean, I spent the better part of my time at the Pentagon pushing for a bunch of different personnel reforms to retain families, because we lose the majority of our female officers in their reproductive years. And that's a lot of progress, but things are undone. IVF benefits in particular for same-sex couples, but also obviously for heterosexual couples would be a great way to improve retention, as would, shall we say, improvement on base health care and child care, so that, if particular dual military couples need to stay on base for multiple years, there's enough child care to go around so officers and enlisted folks can go about and do their jobs and not have to be bled out of pocket by local child care costs. Beyond that, I would say, even though it is politically difficult, a thoroughgoing conversation about family planning and the end of military hide for all service members would be necessary to improve our retention numbers.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that when we talk about family planning and family building, that it's inclusive of the different measures that LGBTQ couples have to go through and the extra steps when we're talking about family building, and make sure that those families are also being supported.
And then just to add to what Kelly said about the extended parental leave policy, there's two other policies that have been released by the department recently. And one of them is the notification of pregnancy policy and the administrative absence for non-covered reproductive health care, which also includes travel allowances for that non-covered reproductive health care. So the command notification policy is such that now a service member can wait up to 20 weeks of pregnancy before they have to notify command that they are indeed pregnant. But it depends. For the most part, it's fine, but there are some MOSs where you need to notify a bit earlier. And then also with the non-covered reproductive health care, that is incredibly important, especially after the Dobbs release, Dobbs Act. And we want to make sure that our military service members have all of the reproductive rights and health care that they deserve and need.
Yeah, and for those who aren't aware, that's a pretty drastic change in the policy. A few years ago, it was 10 days for like the father. So, I mean, you're talking 12, that's definitely more time to spend with your spouse and your family, your new family, especially if it's your first child. So it's big impact on the community for sure. So thank you. So our next question is, do perceptions about family acceptance influence LGBTQ plus service members' health and beliefs about the services?
Yeah, absolutely. We are, geez. I apologize, everyone. I have hay fever, life will go on. We're still barely a decade out of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and that is after 50 years of targeted and systematic bureaucratic violence, and it's going to take a long time for human behavior within a bureaucratic system to change. And on top of that, you now have about half the country banning gender-affirming care for minor dependents, so military children, as well as for trans adults. And on top of that, you have half the states considering don't say gay bills, which would make it untenable to take the 250,000 active duty, Guard and Reserve component LGBTQ service members to different duty stations for necessary steps in their career. And the uniformed services are still getting around to the idea that people who serve are not just straight white men, and it is going to be inherently political to defend all service members. But in the context of claiming that institutionally you're people first, you're going to have to create a sort of comprehensive universe of EO non-discrimination, as well as a constellation of non-discrimination protections and access to benefits. In particular, TRICARE at the moment is not required to provide LGBTQ informed care to 250,000 people, which is not a great way to retain folks. And we can talk about the chaplaincy corps and all of the challenges when it comes to feeling included. And I'm going to pass this to Cathy for a little bit more. But no, it's a long road up, though progress has been made, and I'm cautiously optimistic in the long term.
Such a good handoff, Luke. Thank you. I would add a couple things. My brain is racing at the moment of all the points I want to make sure I get in. So yes, we have the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but transgender service members serve at the discretion of the administration, right? Their service is not codified. It can be taken away. I think 2019 was when we got...
Oh, the Trump ban?
There we go. So
18.
2016 to 2018, there was allowed transgender service, and then we got it back again in 2021. And I would just say that transgender Americans serve at twice the rate of any other group of Americans. So that is just not the group you want to be expelling. They are great Americans who serve honorably. And again, it could all go away in 2024. So, they have that in the back of their minds when they're making career decisions. 95% of our membership, when polled, had altered their career because of anti-LGBTQ laws. So that means they retired early because they felt they weren't safe in a certain state. They went out of their way to change duty stations. They didn't take command somewhere. All those decisions are being made now and definitely affecting retention. For my own family, we blew up my husband's infantry career so that we did not take our transgender child into the Deep South when they had newly transitioned. And families, that was 13 years ago, families are still making those complicated choices right now. And the last big number I'll throw at you is that 5 out of the 6 states with the largest military populations have anti-LGBTQ laws. One more. This is a good one. 25% of the 1 million LGBTQ veterans do not report to their doctors that they are LGBTQ. So they are not getting the kind of informed affirmative care that they need. And I think that is related to the long history of stigma and policies against them that they're dealing with.
Well, we definitely have a long way to go. I mean, we have made progress, but we have a long way to go, and I think that we need to own that. I really appreciate the work that you all do on behalf of the LGBTQ community. It's incredibly important. And one of the things that the Secretary has done, again, from almost day one, is really open that dialogue of how we address our unconscious biases, or not so unconscious, right? They could be very conscious and very deliberate at times. People learn to hide them if they, as they know that they need to, because they need to progress and promote. But eventually it catches up to folks, or or at least we hope that we can see that. I think from my perspective, because I'm military community family policy, so I deal mostly with family members and quality of life issues. One of the things that we recognize is the fact that we have domestic violence incidents that are especially difficult, especially for gay spouses. And we've made a real effort in trying to improve our outreach and education on domestic violence. We actually had a focus group that we reached out to you all, as a matter of fact, and asked if we could sit and visit with some of your folks in your community to talk about what they were seeing, what they were hearing, where were the gaps, what could we do better, and we've been able to get some really, really good information out of that. The other thing, just to mention to you all, is that when I came on board, I wasn't even quite sure what in the world it was that I was supposed to do, because they don't have a little DASD handbook on your desk. And so I was doing a lot of incoming briefings, right, learning as much as I could. And then I got to the point where I said to myself, what is it that I want to impart on the team, so that during the time that I'm here, we kind of work through that lens. And I have 4 imperatives. I won't share all of them with you, but the first one especially is bringing the voices of military families to the department, and I mean all voices, every single voice. And I needed to make sure that whatever promotional items, whatever marketing, whatever images that were being put out were inclusive of everyone in the community, so that everyone in the community could see themselves. And we're trying real hard to do that. the last thing I'll say is I have an incredibly talented friend, her name is Lisa Arfa, that has been made the director of the DEI office in the department, and she is incredible and really is trying to get after some of the more nuances, some of the more hidden issues, and bring them out in the open, because truly without discussion, without transparency, without the opportunity to share with each other, we're not really going to get very far.
That's an excellent point, Patty. I'd like to add on. So not only do we need to concentrate on retention, but recruitment. And military families, especially military children, are a large recruiting pool for the services. It's well known. The National Military Family Association has partnered with Bloom, an organization for military teens. And this year we did our 3rd Military Teen Experience Survey. And of this year's survey, 13% of the respondents responded that they were queer. And so that's a large percentage of military kids and military kids who are future military recruits. So this is something that isn't going to go away. The services really need to hit it head on. And I agree with Patty. I think, discussion through, civil discussion, we'll learn, and we appreciate, and then we have that exchange of ideas. And I don't think we're going to move forward unless we do have those conversations.
Our final question: how can the Department of Defense and the VA expand the LGBTQ plus services across the enterprise health centers and combat the dual crisis of the LGBTQ plus and military mental health crisis?
I would first acknowledge what the VA is doing, right? They have the LGBTQ care coordinators. I think that was a really positive step. They have the Center for Minority Vets now includes a dedicated LGBTQ rep, and they are doing much more LGBTQ outreach. I would say that we need to get all military care providers trained in affirmative and inclusive health care. I cannot tell you the number of families that the #1 complaint is how poorly they were treated in a doctor's office. And if we can erase some of that stigma, then you're going to get much better mental and physical health outcomes. People should feel welcomed in military healthcare facilities, not rejected.
I would add to that, spend money on it. It's the U.S. government and it's America. So it's not just a question of do you feel welcomed. It is, does the institutional culture, going to the earlier question about retention, inclusion, perceptions, matter? And one of the most important things you can do is make sure that when you take your kid in for a doctor's appointment or dentist appointment or whatever, you're not going to be shamed. One of the frequent concerns that comes from our younger constituents who are on active duty is that many of them are on PrEP. And PrEP is not as available as it should be across all U.S. military bases. And there's still stigma around it, as well as the fact that care providers through TRICARE often do not understand what PrEP is for. Most frequently we are told that people, when they go in for an annual physical, will say, I'm on PrEP, and then the person will say, oh, you're HIV positive. We're going to note that in your file, and you're going to stop getting deployed, and your whole career is going to change. And that person is put on the spot to do in-person education, despite the fact that PrEP and Truvada are advertised on Dancing with the Stars. So it is not just institutionally removing the stigma, it's removing barriers to access in the way that we should treat all service members, equitably, fairly, and much more importantly, it's do you want to keep this person around? 13% military kids, 1 in 5, if not more, of Gen Z, and not only are trans people more likely to serve, so are queer people more generally. Queer women are more likely to have experienced military service at a rate around 1/4 to 1/3 over the course of their lifetime. Gay men around 20%. And so, we're in a recruiting crisis. Pick the people who want to show up and give them a reason to stay. If Lockheed and Boeing and Raytheon and, every other entity can do it, DoD and the VA should too. And that's why DoD is going to copy the LGBT care coordinator function. It's just a matter of getting DoD and VA to, for example, agree to set up LGBT care centers in major metropolitan areas for ease of access, ease of use, and do things like follow through on a commitment to cover gender-affirming care for dependents as well as for veterans, which is currently an on-paper commitment from the current secretary, but not a tangible policy outcome. and then preparing to insulate providing this care to people who would think that it's special rights or special benefits, or would want to take it out of sheer cussedness.
You know, we were talking beforehand, and I said there are just some issues that I just don't understand. That, you know, I live life, and I think many people try to, that you need to accept people, and you need to, and we learn. You have conversations, and you learn, and you accept people for what they are. And I think, we just need to do that. Easier said than done, I realize that. But, if physicians, if their children were identifying as queer or LGBTQ+, they would want the best care for their child, regardless. And so I think training of all medical personnel, whether that's at the VA or in military treatment facilities, regardless of your color or your religion, just a respect for that. And I know that's probably unrealistic, and I'm sure many people are going, oh God, go. But it is just, I just think that, if we properly, we need to do training with our medical personnel, our mental health personnel, and also cultural competency with, our medical personnel as well. Ways to ask questions. If they're unfamiliar with PrEP, ask. There's nothing, that's how they learn. And so, and there needs to be an acceptance of that. I just think that, we need training, proper training of our medical personnel, and continuous training. From NMFA, we feel, we discuss this often, that we often feel like we're saying the same thing over and over and over again. And quite honestly, we have to remind ourselves that there are new people coming into the military every single day who haven't heard this. And so the more we repeat it and the more we mirror what that behavior should be, I think the better off we'll be.
Yeah, everybody said everything already, but I love that, give us more money. Right? I mean, we need funding for an awful lot of different things, and certainly the decisions that are made based on the priorities of the department. So you have to be the squeaky wheel that says this is important, but I can tell you that this particular Department of Defense is very tuned into taking care of people. That is one of the Secretary Austin's big pillars, and one of 3, taking care of people, and certainly the memos that have come out recently reflect that. And what I would also say too is that ask the question. We institutionalize or make it policy that those questions get asked at the MTS or wherever there might be offered. We have the Military Family Life Consultant Program under MCNFP, and I'm going to go back to find out what kind of cultural competency training the MFLEX are getting, because I have not asked that question before, and so I will do that. The more that we're aware and the more that we can understand, the better off we're going to be able to support.
Yeah, and that's one thing I'd like to, so I met with a same-sex spouse before coming up here today, and one of his concerns was when he went to the Army Community Services when they were engaged. And they handed him a book literally from the 1970s, and they didn't know what to do, and they referred him to the chaplain. And then the chaplain said, hey, I don't know how to handle this either. So that is one of the biggest things, I think, is just getting that knowledge and passing the word down that to all of those departments, whether it's at the community services level or the medical facilities, to make sure that those types of services are available to everyone.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Gorbolja. I want to thank you all for being here this afternoon. I wanted to ask a quick question regarding just specifics and solutions regarding communication products that that you believe that the VA should be putting out in concerns with health equity, DE&I, and LGBTQ+ community. It's a little loaded, I'm sorry.
Okay, who wants to go first?
Not me.
Okay, a couple different things. First of all, the VA is the single largest queer healthcare provider in the country, directly serving 1.5 million queer veterans. There's a much larger pool of queer veterans out there who need to get access to the VA and can't for historically obvious reasons. In terms of communicating that outwards, it is tricky because obviously the VA is very good at handling queer care. when it has the opportunity, but too much visibility on that might lead to targeted defunding. Yeah. And so the VA is very careful, but like lots of VA centers, I have 2 mentees who use the VA center in San Francisco, and they've had a perfectly lovely time, and they get asked very thoughtful questions about their 2 separate relationships. And there's plenty of information in the VA center about how they treat queer couples for everything from fertility challenges to domestic abuse to marital counseling, all that stuff. A lot of this is in an era where woke culture, DEIJ, all those things are heavily politicized. It becomes very tricky to thread the needle so you can simultaneously reach the audience that you're obliged to support and provide services to, and at the same time not attract negative attention that turns you into a spectacle on a cable news channel for weeks on end that upends everyone's lives. So I think it is a particularly difficult challenge in this era, but it's not impossible to achieve. So that is one crack at that.
One thing we're working on with the VA is promoting their character of discharge review program, so that we can try and undo some of the wrongs that were done disproportionately to people of color and women during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Because the discharge upgrade process within DoD is complicated and time-consuming, and you're not always going to get there. But the VA, for VA benefits purposes, their review takes in extenuating circumstances, and so people end up being a lot more successful in getting benefits that way, and that's really going to improve community relations.
I'm going to add not necessarily a communications point, but we've been advocating with the VA that they need to go in and change U.S. code to reflect the changes with same-sex marriage. That it's often, we'll get phone calls from families asking questions about same-sex benefits. And the forms have been updated, but when they look at the U.S. code, it hasn't been updated. So it may be a minor thing, but it's, I think that it signals that you're truly taking this seriously when you go in and update to be reflective of the policy. We've also, one of the reasons, 3 years ago, the widow's tax was eliminated, and with every change in the survivor benefit plan, there has been an open enrollment period. And we had to, once we were able to eliminate the widow's tax, we had to convince Congress to do another open enrollment. And quite honestly, the big push was that same-sex couples could now elect the survivor benefit plan and hadn't been able to in the past because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So it's those little things that I think that as we chip away at them help communicate that these groups are important and to DoD and the VA.
Just real quick, one thing that I'll mention is if you can give me if you've cracked the code to getting information out to people so that they hear it and use it, I really would love to know. It's just so hard to get your messages out there and to get people to understand that there are lots of resources out there. For me, as a military spouse, it's word of mouth. That's always been the best way for me to get information and continues to be with the new generation of spouses that I connect with. But the one thing I will tell you in the department, we've been tasked, MCNFP, to think about how we're measuring our programs, how we're measuring impact on well-being. I mean, that's a really big question with a big answer. One of the ways that we're starting to try to get after that is to start looking at the measurement of trust and connections with our programs. And there's actually, it's more complicated than it sounds, but I think if we can start there, and then that'll give us the opportunity to kind of then move on to maybe a more standardized or generally used definition of well-being, we might get there. And one thing that I hadn't thought of, and so that's why I'm really glad that I'm here, is I'll go back to the team to say, hey, let's not just go with traditional communities like spouses and children, but look at the subcommunities within them. So I appreciate that.
Great. And so we're getting ready to wrap up. So what I'd like to do is give each of the panelists a moment to give a final comment.
I neglected to say that I'm also an Army wife, Army brat, and I feel like I didn't do my Army credentials justice there when I was introducing myself. Also soon to be an Army mom. Yeah, it was an honor and a privilege to be here. I hope that everyone can just take home that, one of the things we were talking about would be a great improvement was affirmative care, but all your interactions with your military community can also be affirmative. Ask gender-neutral questions. Don't, if you are a military spouse, don't say, what does your husband do? Say, tell me about your family. Things like that. Little changes can just make everyone feel more welcomed.
Unfortunately, I don't have any family military credentials to wave around. I graduated high school at the very start of the War on Terror and took a look at Don't Ask, Don't Tell and my collection of Britney Spears tickets and thought, well, I like kissing boys more than I could possibly like picking up a gun, which is really, really unfortunate because, I was the thing that you want to recruit. I was a four-sport athlete and a straight-A student, and I was and am a whiz at languages, and so, I'm here, and it's great that this has changed, and that's sort of one thing I would highlight. Not only, do Cathy and I represent organizations that advocate for communities that existed and have always existed, but have been shut out of power and conversation, but that we are now having conversations, with the department in a public space, as well as with traditional military family organizations. It suggests that things are in some ways headed in the right direction and may well continue if we're lucky. I
just am appreciative. I thank you for inviting us to participate. We've worked with MMAA and MMAA in the past. Look forward to working with OutServe in the future, and we love working with Patty. So, hopefully we can talk again and continue these conversations.
Absolutely.
And the one last thing that I'll say is that I really do recognize that the Pentagon is full of a lot of closed doors. It's hard to get in there. It's hard to find people to talk to. But you know what? It's full of a whole lot of windows. And you got to find the right window to open. And I'm telling you that we and from my perspective and the time that I have left in the job, you've always got an open door, an open window with MCNFP.
So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.